Hello Rebels, Garrett Robinson here, independent author of the Realm Keeper series, the novel Rebel Yell, the Touch Trilogy, Non-Zombie 1 and 2, the Ninja Bread Man Hit Girls, and currently the fantasy serialized adventure Nightblade, new episode of which releases every Friday. This is my show VlogaNovel, where I live create books for you from beginning to end. Everything from outlining to the first draft, editing, audiobook narration, formatting, and publication all take place on live streaming web video. We are wrapping up the audiobook narration of Nightblade Episode 6. That is going to be going... the audiobook is going to be uploaded as soon as we finish this. And yeah, that book released yesterday. Today. It released today. No, it released yesterday. And you can get it at the link in the blue section of the screen below my face, garrettbrobinson.com/nb-6. If this is the first that you have heard of Nightblade or VlogaNovel or me, you're going to want to go to garrettbrobinson.com/nb-1, the other link in the blue section of the screen. And that is where you can find the first episode of the series for free on all platforms. Kindle, Nook, Kobo, iBooks, it's everywhere. It's on Smashwords. It's gone everywhere. So, without further ado, let's begin narrating the book, shall we? Continue narrating the book. We're on chapter 3. So this is episode 6, so chapter 3 doubles as chapter something else. Chapter 25, chapter 28, okay. Check, check, check. Chapter 3. Chapter 28. Once she explained it to him, Jem did not enjoy the idea. "They could catch me and gut me like a fish," he said. "You're only saying that because you're the one they'll chase," said Lauren. "But they'll never catch you. I've heard stories about how fast you can run." Jem glared at her. "This is different, and you know it." Lauren put a hand on either of his shoulders and rocked him back and forth until he could not help a small smile. "Come now," she said. "You proved to me already that Auntie had no better boy on the roofs. Now you've shown many times your worth in the sewers. Do you really think they'll be able to lay a hand on you? Who knows this place better than you?" "No one," said Jem reluctantly. "As I thought. Come now. Destiny awaits. I'm the one who has to wait in plain sight for someone to sneak up behind me and slip a knife between my ribs." Mollified, Jem stepped with her from the alcove and led her around the corner, back to the tunnel that led to the hidey hole. In truth, Lauren felt much less confidence than she put in her voice. It seemed a good plan, but she was a stranger here. She knew that she knew little, and only hoped that the gaps in her knowing would not cost the boy his life. She could not bear to think of that. But at the same time, neither could she bear the thought of walking away. They snuck back to the edge of the torchlight, the tunnel stretching out before them. Lauren pointed to where a small plank bridge spanned the sewer's channel to the right of the guards. "You'll want to avoid that," she whispered. "They'll cross more easily there. On the other side, they'll be cautious." Jem only nodded. "Can only speak for so long before my voice is like, 'What are you doing?'" Jem only nodded. His eyes had grown large, and Lauren could feel him tremble beneath her hand. She thought of speaking more words of encouragement, but feared only that she'd remind him of his own doubts. She decided upon a gentle nudge instead. "Go, Master Pickpocket," she said, "and remember, keep out of their reach until you're out of sight, and then disappear." Right, said Jem. Very well. Here I go. Do not let this be for nothing. He bounced up and down on the balls of his feet twice, and then with a sharp cry he ran pell-mell down the tunnel toward the guards. "Help! Help!" he cried. "They're coming!" Both boys shot to attention at their posts, looking at each other and then Jem. Lauren saw one of them squint, leaning forward to get a better look at the boy. "Who's coming?" said one of them. His voice sounded low and resonant in the dank space. "Constables!" said Jem. "We've been betrayed!" The guards reached for the cudgels at their waists, but then one of the boys leaned forward. "Hey, wait!" he cried. "It's you!" "It is indeed," said Jem. He skidded to a stop at the end of the tunnel and hooked a left. He vanished out of Lauren's sight around the corner, and with a cry of fury both guards gave chase, cudgels clutched in their meaty fists. Despite the fact it had been her idea, Lauren stood and marveled for a moment. It worked! She had feared only one of the guards would chase Jem, and had no idea what to do if the other remained. Quickly she stole down the tunnel toward the hidey-hole door. She paused at the corner before the door and peeked around it. Torches stretched down the left-hand tunnel as far as she could see, but she saw no sign of Jem or the guards. She gathered herself, then leapt across the channel in one quick jump. She did not hesitate, but darted into the small hallway that led to the hidey-hole door. There it stood, dark and imposing. The wood looked old, ancient even, but sound and without a trace of rot. Polish still covered its surface, and as Lauren put a hand against it she found it dry as a bone, not damp as she would have expected down here. The door had no damage whatsoever, save a grid of indents across its surface. Lauren studied them, curious. They spaced perfectly across the wood, a grid of small dents with 6 inches between each one, from one wall to the other. She threw one quick glance over her shoulder, then put a hand on its knob. It didn't budge. Locked. "Sky and stars," she muttered. She kneeled to look at the lock. It was a massive thing. She kneeled to look at the lock. I said the same line. I said the same line twice. It was a massive thing, made from well-wrought iron that bore no trace of rust. That was odd. The thing should have been rusted through with all the water in the air down here. Lauren felt a prickling along the back of her neck. Could it be some form of enchantment, perhaps? Some fire mage's spell to keep water from metal? That was neither here nor there. Lauren claimed no expertise with locks, but Bracken had taught her something about them. The master thief had had a belt of tools, small intricate spikes and twisted prongs that could best any lock. In his tales, Menet had had a belt of tools, small intricate spikes and twisted prongs that could best any lock. A lock consisted of tumblers, little metal levers that one had to push in the right order to open. Bracken had once carried a big padlock in his pack, and had let Lauren toy around with it, using the end of his twisted knife. She had opened it once or twice, but only after much of Bracken's prodding, and after a great deal of time, and that lock had been a much larger, cruder affair than the one before her now. Still, she did not appear to have much choice. "Let us see what I remember," she said. She drew her hunting knife from her boot. It had a broader blade than Bracken's had, and did not twist. She could fix that, mayhap. She thrust the tip of it into the lock, then pulled it to the side. The metal bent obligingly, almost too well, and she eased off for fear it might snap. Now she had Now she had her poker. She insul- Now she had her poker. She inserted it into the lock again, shoving a bit to make it fit, and began to feel around for the tumblers. The dagger screeched against the iron, and Lauren grew suddenly aware of how quiet the hallway had grown. Only the trickling water sounded behind her. Lauren threw a glance over her shoulder, but all she could see were blinking torchlights stretching away down the tunnel. She turned back to the lock, and as she probed again she felt something give slightly. A small piece of metal, hardly anything at all, but it had to be a tumbler. Lauren heaved a great sigh, then probed again for another. Her knife scraped back and forth, seeking the things out. Perhaps she had probed too far. She drew the knife out slightly, almost to the entrance. She heard another snick, and felt something give, and nearly cried out in triumph. Screech! Lauren looked up just in time to see the ceiling falling upon her. She had only time to drop to the ground. She had time only to drop to the ground, throwing her hands over her head. Something snatched at her cloak, yanking her onto her side. Boom! The sound deafened her. But nothing slammed into her back. No rocks or boulders crushed where she lay. No rocks or boulders crushed her where she lay. She opened her eyes and raised her head. A huge spiked iron grate had swung down from the ceiling, its spikes slamming into the wooden door. Had Lauren remained on her knees, or worse, been standing, she would now be impaled on a dozen jutting protrusions of iron. The bottom spikes had snatched at her hood as the thing fell, and were now embedded in the door. She tried tugging it free, but it would not move. Growling in disgust, she loosened the ties at her throat and freed herself from the cloak. Now the grate hung between her and the door, but through its holes she could still reach the lock, and the door opened inward. If she could get the thing open, mayhap she could lift the trap enough to slide beneath it. She bent to the task, sliding the tip of her hunting knife into the lock once more. But now the gate blocked her way, the grid making each movement awkward, blocking her arms as she sought to twist and turn them in her hunt for the tumblers. Lauren gave another frustrated growl. She must move the gate. Perhaps she could prop it up with something. She looked around but saw nothing. Very well, she would push it back to the ceiling. If it would stick, she would continue her picking carefully. She knew what to expect now. If she tripped it again, she could always get out of the way again. She wrapped her hands around the bottom of the grid and pulled upward. Screech! Lauren dropped it like white-hot metal. They would hear her all across the 9 kingdoms, and the thing weighed so much she doubted she could reach the ceiling with it. Frustrated, she knelt again and went for the lock with her knife. Lauren! A hand came down on her shoulder, yanking her back. Lauren screamed and whirled, slashing wildly with the knife. Jem cried out and fell over backward, crashing hard into the stone floor. Jem! Ugh. Jem! Cried Lauren. What under the sky? I nearly killed you. You couldn't have cut me if you tried, said Jem, his nose in the air even as he climbed back to his feet. But I came back to warn you. They're on their way. You must go. I haven't got in yet, said Lauren. Jem glanced at the door. In or not, any moment they'll be upon us. We must fly before the chance to do so vanishes. Lauren gave the door another look. If I could only... It's just in there, Jem. Don't you know anything about locks? He tugged at her hand again. I told you, only the older boys learn that. We must go. I think one of them is gone for Auntie. Come, come! Lauren growled in anger and followed him, running once again into the darkness of the sewer. All right. Save that puppy. Ugh. Oh. All right, before I begin chapter 4, I'm going to run and grab water because my throat is all bleh. I'll be right back. Oh, I cannot wait for the day when I have an office with a hardwood floor. Carpets are nice, but they're also really not. Okay, here we go. Chapter 4. Chapter 29. Lauren and Jem found their way back to Marcus's shop just before sundown. The cobbler's granddaughter let them in the back door without a word, and when they descended into the cellar, 2 straw pallets waited for them. The blankets looked threadbare, and Lauren saw no pillows, but still the pallets seemed like a small slice of heaven. She realized with a shock that she had not slept in more than a day, since the last morning she woke with Damaris's caravan while on the road to Cabris. Without a word, she and Jem collapsed on the pallets. Sleep claimed her before she even smelled the straw. Terror made a poor aid for sleep. Lauren dreamt of fleeing through the streets of Cabris, while Gregor and Byrne chased her on horseback, and Damaris leapt across the rooftops. The merchant fired at her with bow and arrow, sending darts ricocheting against every wall, rebounding from the cobblestones, always just an inch or 2 from the mark. Gregor and Byrne swung their swords just above or beside her head, and Lauren felt that they played with her, toying with her like cats with a mouse. She fell to her knees, lungs burning and heart threatening to burst through her chest. "Take me, then," she cried. "Have done with it." All of them smiled, but they did not advance. Instead, out of the shadows came Auntie, fingers wrapped around the hilts of her strange knives. A smile frosted her lips as she came forward, and then her eyes glowed, and she changed to the woman in the pink dress, and then to Annis, to Lauren's mother, her father. He leapt forward, knives swooping down to plunge into Lauren's chest. Lauren started awake on her pallet, and her Lauren started awake on her pallet, and her heart would not still for several minutes. Jem snored mightily across the room. Pale light filtered in through a narrow crack in the wall, and from its color and angle she guessed that not an hour had passed since dawn. Down the stairs from the house above drifted the slow, lazy smell of bacon. She heard the clunk of silverware on wooden bowls. She thought of nudging Jem awake to come with her, but the boy's face looked so calm and peaceful, his mouth open and air roaring as he sucked it in through his nose. She could not bear to wake him, so she climbed the stairs alone. Marcus's eyes snapped to her as she emerged from the cellar stairway. "Good morn," he said. Lauren waited for him to ask after her success. He said nothing, but only turned his eyes back to his meal. She rubbed her stomach, which gurgled sudden and loud. Like a wraith from the mist, Marcus's granddaughter appeared at her side. In her hand she had a small wooden plate, and upon it were two thick and juicy strips of bacon. "I would not impose," said Lauren, flustered. The girl only smiled and pressed the plate forward. "Thank you," said Lauren, taking the plate from her. "I fear my manners have been lax. What is your name?" "Enough of that. Tend to your chores," said Marcus. The girl vanished as quickly as she had appeared. Marcus fixed Lauren with a hard eye. "You'll forgive me, of course, but I keep from my grandchildren the names of those what often pass through here. I've no knowledge of what you have or haven't done, and I don't care to. If you come back through here with If you come back through here with Zane, then you can meet her. Most come through once and never show their faces again, and most times that's the way I like it." "Of course," said Lauren in a small voice. She almost took the stool opposite Marcus, but then thought better of it. Instead she turned and headed for the corner of the room. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," said Marcus gruffly. "Sit. You're no animal, neither." "Thank you," said Lauren. She sat and picked up the first piece of bacon. It tasted so good that she thought she might faint. "Haven't been eating, have you?" said Marcus. "Not often or well, no," said Lauren. "It shows." Marcus finished first, standing and vanishing through the door to his workshop. Once she had eaten, Lauren went down to the cellar to fetch Jem. The boy woke reluctantly, and only after many tries. Each time Lauren woke him, he shot up, swearing he was awake. Then he'd lapse back under the blanket and slip from consciousness once more. Finally, Lauren dragged him up and onto his feet. Fortunately, he weighed no more than a bundle of sticks. What?" said Jem. "I'm awake." "You look it," said Lauren. "Now come." "Why?" said Jem. "The door is locked, and we've no chance of opening it. Why not just leave? We stayed, we fought, and from what my eyes have seen, we lost." Lauren glowered at him. He tried to meet her gaze defiantly, but in the end he looked at his feet. They went upstairs, where Marcus's granddaughter appeared again with a plate of food for Jem. Her mind raced as he ate. The problem, she thought, is that he might be right. She hadn't the first clue how they might find their way into Auntie's hidey-hole, and thus no idea how to retrieve her dagger. Yet neither was she willing to give up, to slink through the city's gates with her tail between her legs. "Tell me," she asked Jem, "you said the older boys, when they go to work the hard jobs, learn how to work locks. They must use tools." "Of course," said Jem, looking as though she'd named the sky blue. "Where do they get them? Mayhap we can fetch some of our own." Jem shook his head emphatically. "No good. I wouldn't know where to get them, but even if I did, those merchants sit in Auntie's pocket. They'd send her word before we left the shop." "We could steal them." Jem gave her a look of scorn. "Did you not hear me? I know not where to begin looking. Besides, the boys have no doubt told Auntie about our escapade last night. Guards will surely line the sewer for miles. You will not reach the door again, not now." Lauren felt helpless. She'd not seen one boy in Auntie's employ shorter than herself, and all of them strongly muscled besides. She would have wagered herself better in wrestling or boxing, and thought she might take one of them in a fight, but they would not come one at a time. Auntie owned many. Why should Auntie even wish to plague her so? The woman had to know what it was to be alone in the world, seeking a place for oneself. She had found hers, caretaker of an army of children who would obey her without question. Why did she hate Lauren with such fury, then? She thought further, and a chilling notion struck her. "Jem," she said carefully, "why does she have only boys?" Jem stopped chewing. He did not answer. "Her fighters," said Lauren. "The children are both boys and girls, but the older ones, the children who fight and rob for her, they're all boys." Jem pushed his plate away. "The girls leave." "Leave where?" "I don't know." He picked at it. He picked at his fingernails. "Once they reach a certain age, they just leave, somewhere else." "You never asked where?" He cleared his throat and gnawed at his nails. "I knew one of them once, a girl named Tam. We were friends, or so I thought. One day she just wasn't there anymore. I asked Auntie about her, and she said Tam had gone. She wouldn't tell me where. After I asked too many times, she got mad. She asked me how I'd like to join Tam, where no one would ever see the two of us again. I said no, and she let it go. I didn't ask any more after that." Lauren swallowed hard. "Do you think she—" "I don't think about it at all, nor will I." They both sat in silence for a while after that. From Marcus's workshop came the steady plink, plink, plink of a cobbler's hammer. A thought struck Lauren like a thunderclap. She raised her head, and her hands tensed on the table. Jem must have seen it in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. "Jordell." "The big man in the red cloak? What about him?" "He said he'd help us." Jem pursed his lips. "He said something like that, yes, but I see this as far from his meaning. He can help." "How?" said Jem, spreading his hands. "Will he storm the sewers with us, swinging a mighty sword? I do not see him as the type to cut down young men who have done him no harm, and I would not wish to see him again if he were." "He knows things," said Lauren. "There is wisdom in him, and something else I do not understand. But you can hear it when he talks, see it in the way he carries himself. Jem's eyes widened. You sound like some sunstruck priest raving about gods. Lauren frowned. I suppose you have a better notion, then? Yes, said Jem, as I've said before, and often. Leave. Flee from Cabris, never to return. Lauren shook her head. No, we must try this at least, else I cannot live with myself. Come, we'll find him at the... She froze, her throat constricting. The Wormwing Inn, Jordell had said. Damaris, too, stayed at the Wormwing, and Lauren knew she would not yet have left, not without her daughter. What? Said Jem. Nothing, said Lauren. Only we will have to wait for him to come to us. But finish quickly. The sooner we are off, the sooner our task will be done, and we can leave this place behind us. They dressed as lepers once again. Lauren had grown to hate the rags that covered her, smearing shoe polish along her skin, smelling so strong they made her eyes water. She would have given much for clean rags, but lepers could not afford such. It grew worse in the bright light of day. Summer advanced steadily, and the city streets stank. The shoe polish fairly baked on their skin, and Lauren thought she might faint from the heat and smell of herself. She told Jem to follow back. Excuse me. Oh, by the way, this is my first VlogaNovel episode since I got my new equipment. I got some new lights over there. There's a light there. See? Blocking the light from my face. And there's that light behind me over there, which I'm not really using because it's pointing the wrong way. And then there's that light. And I've had another light right over there, which you can't really see. But I think this looks better. I don't know. Just me, maybe. But I like it. I like it a lot. She told Jem to follow back alleys and side streets. She dared not risk the sewer again, and the roofs seemed too exposed. So he took her on the widest, most winding and hidden route he knew. Sometimes they snuck into building basements, basements that had... Sometimes they snuck into building basements, basements that held passages to other basements, before emerging upon the street again. Lauren could not imagine how Jem had learned of all these places, but then she thought of the birchwood. To her mind leapt every hidden hollow, every secluded copse, all the secret ways and paths she knew through the forest that had been her home for so long. It was no different, she supposed, with Jem and his city. They soon left the Makers' district for the wealthier section of Cabris. The crowds grew sparser, and Jem struggled more and more to keep them from wary eyes. The constables here would not take kindly to lepers wandering among the city folk. The wealthy had no taste for beggars and the diseased. After they ducked down yet another dark alley to avoid a pair of women in red leather armor, Jem growled his frustration and kicked a broken bucket. One cannot take 2 steps without bumping into the King's Law, he said. What I would not give to have the roofs again. Lauren considered it. Auntie could hardly expect them to come to this part of the city, where constables were plenty and Damaris's men lurked. Mayhap she would post fewer guards here, or none at all. In any case, it seemed less risky than... Mayhap she would post fewer guards here, or none at all. In any case, it seemed less risky than the army of constables that plagued the street. Jem spoke truly. Their trip suffered immeasurable delay. Let us take them, then, said Lauren, and if fortune strike us down, at least it will strike swiftly. Jem's face lit up. Together they shucked their leper's rags. A low hanging roof drooped above an obliging rain barrel, and within minutes they had gained the shingles. Lauren took a deep breath, free at last from the choking shoe polish. A whiff of it still lingered, and likely would for some time, but she felt as though she drank her first breath of clean air for many years. "Come," said Jem, "I'll have us there in minutes." He darted away along the rooftop, laughing in the morning air. Lauren grinned as she chased him, and for a time they made a game of it, Lauren overtaking him, then stopping to let him pass her by. She would let Jem cross a few roofs, then work hard at catching him again. It ended all too soon, as Jem had said, and soon he pulled her to a stop. It ended all too soon, as Jem had said, and soon he pulled her to a stop at the edge of a high roof 3 stories up. They sidled up to the edge of it, Lauren peering cautiously down. She did not fear heights, a forester's daughter spent too long in trees for that, but in the wood she had branches to grasp and break her fall, whereas here she saw only air between herself and the ground. "There is the wormwing," said Jem. He pointed to a 3-story structure, its walls purest unmarred white, its roof painted green. Every inch of it bespoke wealth and luxury. Colorful banners draped along its length, and its twin front doors hung wide open, allowing air to flow freely within. Outside those doors stood 2 guards, both in light shirts of mail and armed with long blades. "The finest inn in Cabris," said Jem. "The finest inn in Cabris," said Jem, "or at least no other will make the claim for fear of retribution from the Wormwing's owner. Darius is a hard man, and does not take kindly to the less fortunate sullying his place of business." "A fine place indeed," said Lauren. "And now we wait." "For what?" "For Jordell, of course." They quickly found the roof's edge no comfortable resting place, for the shingles grew hot beneath them, and so they moved to another roof that lay in the shadow of a taller building. There they sat, always with one eye upon the Wormwing's front doors, and let the time pass. As hours wore on, Lauren grew more and more fearful of discovery. Perhaps Auntie would not send her children here, but then again she might. Even if she sent a patrol to sweep through the area once, they could not miss Lauren and Jem sitting in plain sight. Her hope for Jordell's aid grew ever slimmer. Why should the man help them? Lauren and Jem were nothing to him. At best, Lauren served as a means to find Zane. At last, she convinced herself. She sat up from her slouch against the building's upper wall. "I think we remained too long," said Lauren. "You might have been—" "Hold!" said Jem. "There!" Her doubts evaporated. Lauren sat forward, peering at the Wormwing's front doors, and through them stepped a tall man, taller than Lauren herself, draped in a red cloak clasped with a strange symbol in silver. Good. Very good. All right, here we go. Last chapter, guys and girls and whoever. Chapter 5. Chapter 30. Come, hissed Lauren. Follow him. What good will we do up here? Said Jem. We must find our way to the street. Very well, but quickly, said Lauren. If we lose sight of him, all the day's waiting will have been for naught. I think it will be in any case, grumbled Jem, but very well, come. They skidded along shingle and tile until they found a drain pipe. In her haste, Lauren slid too fast, her hands burning against the iron. She winced and slowed herself, blowing on her hands as soon as she reached the ground. He went this way, said Jem, his voice now a low whisper. They took many quick turns left and right, soon sliding through an alley that grew narrower with every step. When they reached its mouth, Lauren poked a cautious head outside. There he was, walking down the street toward where they stood. He seemed in no hurry, his steps slow and sure. Lauren saw him approach two constables chatting by a low wall. One noticed him and nudged the other, and as Lauren watched, they turned and bowed to him. What manner of man was this? But he drew nearer, and Lauren pushed such thoughts from her mind. Psst! She hissed. Jordell! He stopped, his gray eyes darting to where she hid in the shadows. Does he have gray eyes? I don't think he does. Light blue eyes. Damn it, Garrett. He stopped, his light blue eyes darting to where she hid in the shadows. Lauren saw a spark of surprise in those eyes, and then he made for them. So wide were his shoulders she wondered if he would fit in the alley at all. He did, but it was a near thing. Lauren. Lauren, said Jordell, that voice, so soothing, so gentle. And he gave a pointed look at Jem. Jem, said the boy, master pickpocket, scholar, and sometimes medica. My honor, then, said Jordell, bowing his head. What brings you here? Wait, what? There we go. My honor, then, said Jordell, bowing his head. What brings you here? You seem surprised, said Lauren. She raised her chin slightly. When last we spoke, you thought our reunion to be fated. A slow smile came over his face. I said something to the effect, yes. But come now, tell me your business. Is it to do with Zane? Have you told him about me? Lauren hesitated for a moment. As so often happened, his words spurred new ideas in her mind, and then the words formed in her throat. I have, and he seems to think you might be worth trusting. But before he will meet you, we need something. Something stolen from me, quite important, that I must retrieve. Jordell leaned against the wall and folded his arms. I understand your concern, he said, but I fear to tell you that I am no thief. This seems obvious. You have neither the build nor the temperament for it, said Lauren, trying to sound scornful. And yet you seem to have some influence. Constables do not bow to every man in Cabris. No, they do not, agreed Jordell. No, they do not, agreed Jordell. But how do you think that will help you? Mayhap you can determine that, said Lauren. After all, you know your own capabilities more closely than I would. I can tell you where this thing is that was stolen from me. I can tell you who holds the key to its freedom. Can you not summon a squadron of constables, or perhaps some other men who will swing loyal swords in your name? The lines of Jordell's face set, resolute and somewhat sad. Maid Lauren, he said slowly, I fear that you ask for a favor beyond my capabilities. I cannot help you in this, except perhaps to offer counsel. Counsel? Said Lauren, stomping her foot. What good is that? I do not need counsel. I need men with strong arms and loyal hearts. I am full to bursting with wit, but what good is that without the strength to back it? A A spark flashed in Jordell's eyes, and to Lauren's fury he smirked. With enough wit, the strength of an enemy is useless, he said, a lesson I try to impart on all my students. You say that some foe has stolen something from you. What do you still have that this enemy wants? Lauren felt herself shrink. Nothing I can give, for she wants only me. Jordell smiled full and broad, and it held a crafty smirk. Well, then, why not give that? Lauren snorted. You must be renowned as a great teacher, she said. If for a moment I fell into my foe's hands, it would be the end of me. The greatest fortune I could hope for would be a constable's cell, or worse, to find myself handed over to one who hates me even— She stopped. The whirling doubt in her mind subsided, and suddenly, as if for the first time, she saw with crystal clear and blinding clarity. I think the student has taken the lesson to heart, said Jordell. Thank you, murmured Lauren. Jem, let us be off. We have must— Thank you, murmured Lauren. Jem, let us be off. We have much to do. What? Said Jem. Where? Jordell thrust out a hand, and Lauren took his wrist absent-mindedly. Then she led Jem off down the alley. She looked back once to see Jordell silhouetted in the mouth of the alley. Though shadow covered his face, she thought she could imagine his smile. What madness has seized you? Said Jem. I feel as though the man whispered secret words only you could hear. In a manner of speaking, yes, said Lauren. Her thoughts finished their whirling, the plan clear before her. Now we must busy ourselves. Quickly, find a constable. What? Said Jem, looking as though she had lost her mind. Never you mind, said Lauren, exasperated. She found an outlet and poked her head out. There, 4 of them stood not far away, hands on swords as they waved off flies with mail-gloved hands. Now you must go to them, Lauren began. What? Said Jem, his voice nearly a shriek. You must go to them, she insisted, and tell them this exactly. Tell them you have seen the girl that the Constable Byrne searches for. Do you hear? Constable Byrne. Tell them that she will be at Auntie's hideout tomorrow at the break of dawn, and they must inform Constable Byrne immediately. I do not think many constables know of Auntie's hideout, said Jem doubtfully. Lauren cuffed him gently on the back of the head. Of course not, fool. Explain to them where it is and what it looks like. Now, quickly, go! She shoved Jem out of the alley, then slid out of sight. She saw him stand there for a moment, uncertain. Then he squared his shoulders and marched off in the direction of the constables. She slid out a bit, just enough to see the ghost of his image around the corner of the building. The constable's eyes locked on him almost immediately, and almost his steps faltered. But he kept on, and soon stood before them, dwarfed by even the shortest. Lauren saw his arms swing wide as he relayed her words, and the constables looked at each other with concern. Then one of them spoke gruff words, and Jem nodded energetically. Finally he outthrust a hand. 3 of the constables scowled, but the 4th barked a sharp laugh and pulled out a coin. With a sharp flick of the wrist, he flung it into Jem's chest. Jem caught the coin easily and turned, heading back toward Lauren, who stepped out of sight. Jem appeared in the alley mouth moments later, flipping a silver penny in the air. Done and done, he said, and a coin for my troubles. We are hardly poor, said Lauren. It helped the story, said Jem airily. What constable would believe a beggar boy unless he begged? Lauren rolled her eyes. Come, then, she said. Now for the great gambit. She strode with purpose through the alley, toward the open square near which they had met Jordell just minutes ago. Jem's steps slowed as they neared the alley mouth, but Lauren pressed on. Lauren, he whispered. She stepped out into the open air. He squeaked, and she heard silence behind her as he thought of what to do. Then he leapt out and ran after her, bare feet slapping against the cobblestones. What are you doing? He hissed. I hope I know, she admitted. Straight to the front doors of the Wormwing she strode. The guards looked up the moment she approached, but she walked with such confidence and purpose that they glanced at each other, uncertain. Their moment's hesitation proved all Lauren needed, marching straight through the front doors as though she owned the Their moment's hesitation proved all Lauren needed, and she marched straight through the front doors as though she owned the inn and every other building along the street. Jem whimpered audibly as she set foot on the sawdust that covered the hardwood floor. The whole of the elf's purse could have fit within the common room. She scanned the tables as she walked. Many sat in the center of the room, level with her as she entered, but more ran along a raised walkway a few feet off the ground that ran the length of the walls, and at one such table she found what she sought. She climbed the and at one such table she found what she sought. She climbed the stairs and walked straight to the table where Damaris sat. The merchant's startled gaze never left Lauren's face for a moment. Gregor stepped forward as she approached, but Damaris raised a hand and he subsided. Without a pause or a second thought, Lauren threw herself into the chair opposite Damaris and leaned back, throwing her boots up to rest on the table. The shock of them rocked Damaris's goblet, tipping it over to send red wine spilling over the table to the floor. "Greetings again, Damaris of the family Yeren," said Lauren. "I wager that we have much and more to talk about." And that's it at the 56-minute mark. That is the completion of the audiobook recording for Nightblade episode 6. So that's it for this VlogaNovel playlist. When I begin again in a little bit, probably an hour and a half, that will be the start of episode 7, the outlining process for that. So thanks for tuning in. If you did, whether you watched live or you watched at some distant point in the future, I appreciate you being here. I will let you know. Obviously, stay tuned on Google Plus and Twitter and Facebook and everything for when I begin the next book. Thanks for tuning in for VlogaNovel. Once again, you can get this book at the blue section of the screen, garrettbrobinson.com/nb-6, and I will see you next time. Bye.